Introduction. In a society that often equates popularity with success and social circles with self-worth, the idea of a woman with no friends is often misunderstood. She's labeled as cold, arrogant, or even broken, but is that really the truth? What if her solitude is a choice, not a curse? What if it reflects strength rather than weakness? The distinction between social isolation and solitude is subtle, yet profoundly important, especially when analyzing the life and choices of a woman who appears to have no friends. From an outside perspective, this might seem concerning, even abnormal, in a world where constant connectivity is praised and loneliness is feared. However, what we often fail to recognize is that solitude, when chosen consciously, can be one of the most empowering and enlightening states of being. Social isolation typically refers to a lack of social connections that is involuntary. It can be harmful to one's emotional and psychological health, often leading to feelings of depression, anxiety, and low self-worth. This form of isolation is marked by the desire for connection that remains unfulfilled. In contrast, solitude is the deliberate decision to withdraw from constant social interaction, not out of rejection by others, but out of the need for personal growth, reflection, and self-preservation. It is in solitude that many women find the clarity and strength they need to thrive. The modern woman, especially one who is self-aware and goal-oriented, may choose solitude over friendships that no longer serve her. This choice is not rooted in bitterness or elitism, but in a clear understanding of what adds value to her life and what drains it. In this sense, solitude becomes a protective space, a sanctuary from superficial conversations, emotional labor without reciprocity, and relationships that operate on competition rather than support. Historically, women have been socialized to be nurturing, to prioritize relationships, and to be available emotionally for others. This conditioning can create pressure to maintain friendships even when they are one-sided, toxic, or exhausting. For the woman who decides to step away from this pattern, the journey can be both liberating and misunderstood. Her decision to be alone is often interpreted as a failure to maintain social ties, but in reality, it is often the result of deep introspection and courage. She is choosing her well-being over social approval. The impact of technology and social media cannot be ignored in this context. Today, friendship is often portrayed as a numbers game. Followers, likes, group chats, and weekend plans are seen as evidence of social worth. For the woman who opts out of this digital performance, who does not participate in performative friendship, the appearance of having no friends can be a radical act of authenticity. She might be investing her time in reading, building her career, practicing self-care, or simply enjoying her own company. In these acts, there is no audience, no applause, only the quiet satisfaction of living a life aligned with her values. It is important to recognize that solitude is not synonymous with loneliness. Loneliness is the painful awareness of being disconnected, often involuntarily. Solitude, on the other hand, is a state that can be both nourishing and transformative. Many creative thinkers, spiritual leaders, and innovators throughout history have spoken of the power of solitude in accessing deeper truths and fostering creativity. Similarly, the woman who embraces solitude is often engaged in a process of inner work, discovering her identity outside of societal expectations, healing from past traumas, and setting boundaries that protect her peace. Psychologically, solitude can enhance emotional regulation, improve concentration, and increase empathy. Without the constant noise of external validation or the distraction of maintaining social appearances, a woman can turn inward and ask herself questions that matter. What do I truly value? What kind of energy do I want around me? Am I engaging with others out of love or out of obligation? In asking and answering these questions, she strengthens her emotional intelligence and sense of agency. Furthermore, a woman with no friends is often one who has learned to enjoy her own company. This is a skill that not everyone possesses. Many people fear being alone because they are unfamiliar with themselves outside of their relationships. They define themselves through their connections, which can become problematic when those relationships are unstable or unhealthy. The woman who can sit in silence, take herself to dinner, travel alone, or make decisions without external input is demonstrating a level of self-reliance that is often underestimated. Still, it is worth noting that choosing solitude is not a rejection of people altogether. It is a refinement of how and with whom one connects. This woman may have acquaintances, mentors, colleagues, or even a partner, but she is intentional about the energy she allows into her life. She is not antisocial, she is selectively social. She is not friendless due to incapacity, but by design. She understands that emotional safety and alignment are more valuable than familiarity or social obligation. One common misconception is that this woman is cold or emotionally unavailable. On the contrary, she may feel deeply, but has learned not to offer her emotional resources to people who do not reciprocate. She knows her emotional bandwidth is limited and sacred. She does not see relationships as status symbols, but as living, breathing connections that require trust, respect, and mutual investment. Educationally, understanding this distinction between isolation and solitude allows us to reframe narratives around women who do not conform to the typical image of sociability. Rather than seeing her as flawed or in need of fixing, we can begin to appreciate the discipline, maturity, and self-awareness required to walk alone with confidence. This insight is particularly valuable in developing emotional intelligence and promoting mental health literacy, especially for young women learning to navigate a noisy, often judgmental world. In conclusion, when we see a woman with no friends, we should not rush to assume loneliness or failure. We should instead consider the possibility that she is operating from a place of clarity, strength, and discernment. She may have outgrown environments that once defined her, and rather than lowering her standards, she has chosen to wait for authentic, aligned connections, or simply thrive on her own. In a world that pressures women to be everything to everyone, her solitude may be her strongest form of self-respect. In a culture that often measures social success by the number of friends, followers, and contacts a person has, it becomes easy to overlook a fundamental truth: not all relationships are created equal. A woman who appears to have no friends may not be friendless in the emotional sense, but rather selective in the truest form. She may have chosen to disengage from shallow, unfulfilling, or even harmful relationships in favor of something more meaningful, quality over quantity. This mindset reflects a deep shift in how we understand social well-being. It challenges the assumption that being surrounded by people is inherently good, or that being alone signals failure. Social circles that are large but lack emotional depth can leave a person feeling lonelier than being alone. Many women experience this paradox, being in a room full of people, yet feeling unseen or unheard. Over time, they begin to recognize that proximity does not equal connection, and that interaction does not always result in support. Choosing fewer, but more meaningful, relationships requires emotional maturity. It means understanding one's values, needs, and boundaries, and being willing to act on that understanding, even when it leads to social discomfort or judgment. The woman who prioritizes quality over quantity in her relationships has likely undergone a process of self-examination. She has asked herself critical questions. Are the people around me helping me grow? Do they respect my boundaries? Do they understand me, or do they simply tolerate me? These questions often reveal hard truths, which can result in a narrowing of the social circle. This narrowing is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of refinement. It reflects the recognition that relationships should nourish, not drain. A woman may find that many of her past friendships were built on convenience, shared environments, or mutual complaints rather than authentic compatibility. As she evolves, so do her standards. She learns to walk away from gossip-based dynamics, emotionally unavailable friends, or relationships built on competition rather than support. In doing so, she often finds herself alone, not because she is unlovable, but because she refuses to accept less than what she knows she deserves. There is also a psychological cost to maintaining large numbers of superficial relationships. Emotional energy is finite. Time, attention, empathy, and care cannot be infinitely given without consequence. When a woman begins to value her emotional energy as a limited resource, she becomes more intentional about where and how she invests it. This shift often leads to pruning, the deliberate process of letting go of relationships that no longer serve her mental or emotional health. Moreover, when a woman seeks depth, she often finds that it is rare. True emotional intimacy, where both people feel seen, valued, and safe, is not easily found in every social circle. It requires vulnerability, trust, and mutual growth. These are not characteristics that flourish in every friendship. Therefore, instead of filling her life with social noise, she may choose silence over meaningless chatter, peace over obligation, and self-reflection over external validation. This choice becomes even more pronounced as a woman matures emotionally. While adolescence and early adulthood often emphasize peer approval and belonging, a more mature woman becomes less interested in fitting in and more committed to standing firm in her authenticity. She no longer fears being alone because she understands that companionship should never come at the cost of self-respect or inner peace. This is a powerful shift, one that redefines what friendship means. Interestingly, this mindset can sometimes be misread by others. A woman who is socially selective might be labeled as aloof, distant, or arrogant, but these labels often come from those who expect access without accountability. When a woman raises her standards, especially in relationships, it can challenge others' expectations and comfort zones. Some may interpret her boundaries as rejection, when in reality, they are simply expressions of self-awareness and self-protection. Educationally, this topic speaks to the importance of teaching emotional intelligence and social discernment. In environments like schools, workplaces, and even families, there is often pressure to maintain appearances and go along with group dynamics, even when they are unhealthy. Yet, what we should be teaching is that it is okay, and even necessary, to choose quality over popularity. It is better to have one friend who truly supports you than 10 acquaintances who only show up when it's convenient. Additionally, understanding the value of quality relationships can protect individuals from emotionally manipulative or codependent dynamics. When a woman knows her worth, she becomes less susceptible to staying in relationships out of guilt, habit, or fear of being alone. She no longer equates love with sacrifice or support with silence. She becomes her own gatekeeper, allowing in only those who align with her values and intentions. This approach does not make her perfect or immune to loneliness. Even the strongest women can feel the sting of disconnection. However, what sets her apart is her willingness to wait for the right connections rather than settling for the wrong ones. She understands that the absence of friendship is better than the presence of false friendship. She knows that quiet evenings alone are far healthier than emotional roller coasters with people who misunderstand or misuse her. A woman who chooses quality over quantity in relationships is also modeling something powerful for others. She is showing that it is okay to have high standards. She is demonstrating that boundaries are not barriers, but bridges to better connections. She is proving that silence can be healing and that one's worth is not determined by how many people are around, but by how deeply one is connected to oneself and to those few who truly matter. In a world that often glorifies constant connection, she is an example of conscious disconnection. Her life may not be filled with crowds, but it is rich in clarity. She does not need a group to validate her identity, nor does she depend on others to define her happiness. Instead, she chooses, with intention and care, who gets access to her time, her heart, and her energy. In summary, when a woman appears to have no friends, it may not reflect a lack, but rather a level of discernment most people never reach. She is not anti-connection, she is pro-authenticity. Her life is not empty, it is curated. Her silence is not sadness, it is strength, and her solitude is not absence. It is evidence of standards. In choosing quality over quantity, she reclaims her power and invites others to do the same. A woman with no friends is often viewed with suspicion or concern. The default assumption is that something must be wrong. Perhaps she's socially awkward, emotionally distant, or simply unlikable. But this narrow view fails to consider a powerful alternative. What if she is simply self-reliant? What if her apparent detachment from social circles is not a symptom of weakness, but a declaration of inner strength? In many cases, a woman who walks alone does so not because she has no options, but because she has developed the kind of self-reliance that allows her to thrive without constant validation or support from others. Self-reliance is a concept that is often misunderstood in a culture built around interdependence and social networks. While healthy relationships are undeniably important, so is the ability to stand firmly on one's own. A self-reliant woman possesses the mental, emotional, and often financial tools to navigate life independently. This does not mean she rejects others outright, but that her identity, choices, and well-being do not hinge on the presence or approval of others. This form of empowerment often develops through experience, especially through hardship. Many self-reliant women did not set out to be alone. Life taught them that not everyone is dependable, not every relationship is reciprocal, and not every friend remains one. Through betrayals, disappointments, or repeated patterns of emotional labor without return, they began to realize that depending solely on others was not sustainable. So, instead of collapsing under the weight of that realization, they adapted. They began to cultivate within themselves the qualities they had once sought from others: support, encouragement, strength, and even companionship. This inner transformation marks a major psychological shift. Instead of viewing herself as someone waiting to be rescued, comforted, or completed, the self-reliant woman becomes the provider of those needs for herself. She becomes the emotional anchor in her own life. She starts solving her own problems, celebrating her own wins, and comforting herself through her own lows. In doing so, she gains a level of independence that makes her less susceptible to manipulation, less needy for attention, and more aligned with her personal values and goals. From a psychological perspective, self-reliance contributes to higher self-esteem and resilience. When a woman believes in her own ability to meet her needs and navigate challenges, she becomes less anxious about rejection or abandonment. She no longer fears being alone because she understands that solitude does not equate to inadequacy. Rather, it becomes a space where she exercises her competence, her peace, and her self-control. Moreover, self-reliance allows for clearer decision making. When a woman is not constantly influenced by peer pressure, external expectations, or the fear of losing social favor, she can make choices that are genuinely in her best interest. Whether it's deciding where to live, what career to pursue, or whom to allow into her inner circle, her decisions are based on internal guidance rather than external consensus. This clarity creates a life that is authentic and grounded in purpose, not performance. Socially, this can make her seem detached or intimidating. Some may perceive her confidence as arrogance or her solitude as a lack of sociability. But these perceptions often reveal more about societal discomfort with women who do not conform to traditional roles of nurturers, pleasers, or dependents. A woman who does not need others disrupts the norm. She sets her own terms. She is not easily swayed by trends, flattery, or groupthink, and that kind of autonomy can feel threatening to people who rely on social cohesion to define their identity. Yet, the empowerment she gains from self-reliance is not about superiority, it is about sovereignty. She knows her limits. She knows how to protect her peace. She does not need to chase approval or settle for toxic dynamics just to avoid loneliness. She chooses her solitude carefully, the way one might curate a collection of meaningful objects, each decision intentional, each boundary built with purpose. This level of control over her environment is not the result of luck, but of personal discipline. It's important to emphasize that self-reliance does not eliminate the desire for connection. The empowered, self-reliant woman may still crave intimacy, love, and companionship, but she no longer sees these as needs to be fulfilled by anyone who shows interest. She is not willing to compromise her values or emotional well-being for temporary comfort. She has learned that being alone can be far more fulfilling than being entangled in a relationship or friendship that feels forced, shallow, or unsafe. Educationally, teaching the principles of self-reliance to women is essential. It fosters a generation of individuals who are emotionally intelligent, boundary conscious, and mentally prepared to navigate a complex world. It also reduces dependency on external validation, which is especially important in a digital age where social comparison and curated online identities can distort reality. When women are raised or mentored to believe that their strength lies within, not in their social connections, marital status, or popularity, they begin to see solitude not as a deficiency, but as a skill. This shift in mindset can also lead to better relationships in the long run. A self-reliant woman is not entering into relationships to be rescued or completed. She is entering from a place of fullness. She does not seek to possess others or be possessed. She seeks partnership, mutual respect, and shared growth. Her friendships, when they exist, are chosen, not out of fear of being alone, but out of genuine connection and trust. These relationships tend to be more stable and emotionally healthy because they are built on alignment, not dependency. One of the most admirable qualities of such women is their ability to endure periods of emotional drought without compromising their standards. They know how to manage their own emotions, how to comfort themselves in times of doubt, and how to keep moving forward even when no one is watching. Their lives are not dictated by trends, relationships, or social calendars. Instead, they are led by purpose, clarity, and self-worth. In the broader cultural conversation, we must begin to normalize and even celebrate women who live this way. Not all power is loud, not all success is visible, and not all strength comes from numbers. Some of the most powerful women walk quietly, think deeply, and engage selectively. They are not friendless, they are free from emotional debt, social pressure, and the constant need to explain themselves. In conclusion, the woman with no friends may be the woman who has mastered the art of self-reliance. She does not fear silence. She does not crumble without applause. She moves with intention, guided by inner wisdom, and protected by the boundaries she's earned through experience. Her empowerment is not loud, but it is unshakable, and in a world that often seeks to define women by their relationships, her autonomy is nothing short of revolutionary. In reflecting on the idea of a woman with no friends, we are not merely confronting a social label, we are challenging an entire framework of assumptions about connection, identity, and strength. What may outwardly appear as isolation is, in many cases, a conscious and courageous expression of personal evolution. Through the lens of solitude, intentional relationships, and self-reliance, we come to understand that this woman is not defined by the absence of others, but by the presence of herself. She is not a cautionary tale, but a case study in resilience. She has chosen solitude not out of fear, but out of discernment. She has prioritized the quality of her interactions over their frequency, recognizing that not all relationships nourish and not all company comforts. And in doing so, she has forged a powerful inner life, one that is not dependent on applause, agreement, or attention. What we learn from her journey is essential for our time, that being alone is not synonymous with being incomplete, that selective relationships are not a weakness but a strength, and that true empowerment begins not when we are surrounded, but when we can stand alone without compromising our values. She is not invisible, she is simply no longer performing. Her energy is not scattered among the many, but protected for the few, or simply for herself. In honoring her experience, we are invited to ask deeper questions about our own lives. Are our relationships adding to or subtracting from our well-being? Do we seek connection out of genuine alignment or out of habit and fear? Can we sit in our own silence, knowing we are enough? The woman with no friends teaches us that solitude can be a sanctuary, that boundaries can be beautiful, and that walking alone, with clarity and conviction, can be the most dignified journey of all.